Today we are diving deep into one of the strangest and most intense conflicts to ever unfold on the Minecraft server Stoneworks. The Sewer War, a civil war that split the province of Kadus in two, with a bitter divide between those who lived above the streets and those who lurked beneath them. But before we get into the chaos, betrayal, and sewer-delling revolutionaries, let me tell you a bit about Stoneworks itself. Stoneworks is a geopolitical roleplay server unlike anything you've seen before. Every town, war, law and religion is player created. Nations rise, empires fall, and history is written by the players who live it. And the best part? You can be a part of it. If you want to shape your own story, forge a kingdom, or even start your own sewer rebellion, hop on the server today. The IP is play.stoneworks.gg. No mods needed, just Java, Minecraft, and some imagination. Now, let's head into the shadows and explore the conflict that tore Kadus apart. This is the story of the Sewer War. To understand the Sewer War, we first need to go back, before the conflict, before the divide, to the beginning of Kadus itself. The story starts with a single man, Bingus Aether, born in 57 Voyagers era in the bustling city of Alatsania of the state of Zamotz within the United States of Adramis. A commoner by birth, Bingus seemed destined for a quiet, uneventful life. Until, at just 14 years old, he vanished. In 71 Voyagers era, Bingus ran away from home, leaving his family in heartbreak and uncertainty. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a journey that would shape an entire province. Bingus travelled far and wide across the lands of Abexless. From windswept deserts to coastal harbours, he met outcasts and wanderers of the world. Those like him who felt they didn't belong. These weren't just chance encounters, they were the seeds of something greater. 2 years later, in the spring of 73 Voyagers era, Bingus returned, not as a lost child, but as a man with a vision. He brought with him a diverse group of companions, explorers, thinkers, rebels, all united under the desire to build something new. Together, they set their sights in the quiet coastal region of Kadus. Bingus dreamed of transforming Kadus from a scattering of sleepy fishing villages into a bustling trade hub. A gateway between land and sea. A port city of influence, culture, and power. But while he worked to shape Kadus into something new, his reunion with his family wasn't so simple. Years of absence had changed him and them. Though they were together again, something was off. Distant. Like strangers sharing a last name. And so, with ambition in his heart and a strange tension at home, Bingus laid the foundations for what would become known as Sparkstone, the beating heart of Kadus, and eventually, the centre of a civil war. With his vision set and his people gathered, Bingus wasted no time. He poured his energy into building up the settlement of Sparkstone, turning it from a hopeful dream into a living, breathing city. To ensure stability during its rapid growth, Bingus took on the role of temporary governor of Kadus, a province that, until then, had remained largely quiet and fragmented. Bingus appointed trusted allies to key positions. Queasley, a capable and charismatic figure, was named mayor of Sparkstone, while Lugs, known for his discipline and loyalty, was chosen to command the newly formed Kadus Guard. This local police force was established to maintain law and order as the province grew, a necessary step in a land where structure had once been scarce. With more and more people arriving in Kadus, drawn by the promise of opportunity and community, the province began to outgrow its borders. To accommodate this boom, Bingus entered into tense negotiations with the federal government of Adramis, seeking to annex the adjacent province of Authy. The proposal was met with resistance, particularly from the Adramis official Elkul, who criticised the annexation as overreach. Elkul relented, and Authy was officially absorbed into Kadus, more than doubling its territory and resources. On the surface, it looked like a golden age for Kadus. Expansion, unity, and prosperity. But beneath the streets of Sparkstone, something else was beginning to stir. A different kind of movement. One that didn't see the Kadus Guard as protectors, but as oppressors. One that would soon boil over into a full-scale civil war. But Kadus' challenges weren't limited to internal politics. From beyond its borders came a threat that would change everything. Commander Karol, a high-ranking official from the United States of Adramis, launched a violent assault on Kadus. His goal: to enslave the people, taking advantages of Adramis' laws, which still permitted slavery at the time. His attack was brutal and sudden. Hostages were taken, ransoms demanded. For many citizens of Kadus, this was their very first encounter with Adramis' power, and it came at the end of a sword. Under the leadership of Lugs, with the help of a rising local hero Shmoopdoop, the Kadus Guard rallied and successfully pushed back Karol's forces. The people of Kadus stood strong, but they would not forget. Governor Bingus responded swiftly, threatening to bring Karol before the High Court of Adramis, demanding reparations for the destruction and terror he'd caused. But justice moved slowly, too slowly, and the damage had already been done. Just as tensions within Adramis reached a boiling point, a new scandal threatened to fracture Kadus from within. Mayor Queasley of Sparkstone, once seen as a competent and loyal ally to Bingus, found himself in the centre of a bitter dispute with Mayor Hakonia of Indusia. The issue? A livestock disagreement that spiralled into a full-blown political crisis. What started as a quarrel over property rights escalated rapidly, with Mayor Hakonia threatening to remove Indusia from Kadus altogether, seeking instead to rejoin the more established province of Alatsania. For Bingus, this was a potential disaster. Losing Indusia would signal that Kadus was falling apart. Desperate to avoid public fallout, Bingus intervened, and after intense negotiations and even the threat of legal action, Queasley and Hakonia managed to settle their dispute behind closed doors. For now, Indusia would remain as part of Kadus, but the close call left deep scars. In response, Bingus realized something had to change. Kadus was growing fast, and its leadership needed to evolve with it. He began preparations to redraft the province's constitution, aiming to put in place stronger systems of accountability and oversight for local leaders. As Sparkstone grew, so did its problems. A wave of drug addiction began to spread through the province, tearing through the lower classes and leaving families broken. At the centre of it all was Ashran's cartel, a ruthless criminal organisation funneling illicit substances into the streets of Sparkstone. As housing prices climbed and jobs grew scarce, many of Kadus' most vulnerable citizens, the addicted, the jobless, the forgotten, were pushed out into the city, into its vast underground sewer system. There, hidden from view, the cartel thrived. And with it, a new community began to take shape. Governor Bingus, recognising the growing threat, took decisive action. He officially declared the cartel an enemy of the state, and mobilised the Kadus Guard to carry out raids, enforce curfews, and dismantle the cartel's growing grip in the city. But just as the crackdown began to show results, a devastating discovery was made. Queasley, Mayor of Sparkstone, and even Commander Lugs of the Kadus Guard were found to have minor ties to the cartel's operation, whether through negligence, bribes, or passive cooperation. For Bingus, it was a betrayal that struck deep. Rather than bury it, Bingus confronted the corruption head on. Through internal investigations and political pressure, he rooted out the disloyalty, holding his closest allies accountable and demanding the return to the path of justice. And they did. Dozens of police operations followed, street raids, sewer sweeps, supply seizures. The cartel's power began to wane, but the damage had already been done. The sewers had transformed from a place of decay into a hidden city for the displaced. A place where many no longer trusted the surface world, nor the leaders who ruled it. And it was there, in those dark tunnels beneath Sparkstone, that a new ideology would take place. One that would eventually rise up in open rebellion. As Kadus grappled with political division, cartel violence, and the rising unrest beneath the streets, another event would shake the province to its core. This time, not political or criminal, but divine. It began during a violent dispute between the Kadus Guard and the notorious bandit group led by a man named Nakato. The clash left much of Sparkstone in ruins. Homes shattered, streets burning, civilians caught in the chaos. But in the middle of the destruction, something miraculous happened. As told by several guard troops in the front lines, including Luggs and Murphy, a holy figure descended from the skies. Radiant and powerful, the entity struck fear into the hearts of the attackers and banished Makato to a distant realm. The survivors, stunned and awestruck, began to speak of the one they had seen, a deity of the sea and salvation, who had come to Sparkstone in its darkest hour. They gave this god a name: Marmotte. What followed was nothing short of a religious revival. The worship of Marmotte spread like wildfire. The citizens, desperate for meaning and protection in a world spiraling into chaos, found hope within the teachings of Marmotte's disciples. They claimed that Sparkstone itself had been chosen as the holy city of the god, the sacred heart of his divine mission. Temples, shrines, and sea altars rose quickly, lining the canals and coastlines of Kadus. Fishermen painted symbols onto their sails. Soldiers invoked Marmotte before battle. Marmottism soon became the primary religion of Kadus, woven into its culture, politics, and even military doctrine. But faith, like politics, can be a double-edged sword. The province of Kadus soon found itself plunged into a bitter religious schism within Marmottism, a division that would shake the very foundations of the province. The conflict ignited when Marmottis discovered something extraordinary. In the remote town of Waden, an illegal settlement deep within Kadus' borders. Among the ruins, they found significant religious artifacts, including a modest house believed to have once housed Marmotte himself, the prophet and the deity they worshipped. Declaring Waden a sacred site, the Marmottists partnered with the Kadus Guard to officially annex the town into the province, willing to do whatever it took to protect their holy ground. But unity would not last. In a dramatic twist, Queasley, former mayor of Sparkstone and close ally to Governor Bingus, made a stunning religious claim. While fishing in the sacred waters, Queasley retrieved a mending book, a symbol revered in Marmottism as a divine sign. Seizing the moment, Queasley declared himself the new chosen one, a messenger of Marmotte's renewed will. He then penned a new holy text, introducing updated commandments that diverged sharply from the original teachings. This radical doctrine birthed a breakaway sect, known as the Mended, followers who embraced Queasley's vision of reform and renewal. In response, the original Marmottists rallied under the name Spravinsky Polovdonskivi, the true followers, fiercely defending the ancient faith and the sanctity of Waden. Tensions escalated into violent clashes as both factions fought bitterly for control of the holy city. Eventually, the traditionalists seized Waden, solidifying their claim to religious authority. But the conflict was far from over. Caught in the middle of the schism, Governor Bingus chose to stand with the Mended, supporting Queasley's reforms and further deepening the divide within Kadus. What began as a spiritual awakening had turned into a volatile religious war, one that threatened to tear apart the fragile unity of the province. By now, the divide in Kadus was no longer just political, or religious, or economic. It was total. Sparkstone was a city split in two. Above ground, the well-lit streets, towering stone buildings, and ocean-kissed air lived the upper and middle class, the loyalists, the reformers, the faithful followers of the Mended. They saw their place within the United States of Adramis as one of honor and opportunity. But below, in the twisting sewer tunnels and decaying chambers beneath the city, gathered the lower class, abandoned by the surface. They rallied under the banner of the true followers, the Spravinsky Poldonskuvi, who rejected Queasley's doctrine and declared the surface corrupted by heresy. And deeper still, nationalists and revolutionaries, many aligned with Kadus People's Party, whispered of breaking free from Adramis entirely, of building a new Kadus, forged in the shadows. The sewers had become more than refuge. They were now a city of their own, a city in exile. Every street above had a rival path below, every surface leader had an enemy in the depths, and every holy scripture had a counter, rewritten by candlelight in the dark. Kadus stood on the edge of war, a war not of invaders, but of neighbours, of brothers and sisters. a war between two cities stacked one atop the other, and it would become known as the Sewer War. Crime was rising, and so were tensions. Deep beneath Sparkstone, Ashran's cartel had taken hold. Once a fringe operation, it had now become a loud majority among the sewer folk, thriving in the lawless tunnels beneath the surface. Robbery, extortion, smuggling, and violence spread upwards onto the streets of Sparkstone, Athlon, and even Pinehay. Surface citizens lived in fear, but what many missed was the truth. For every act of brutality, there were 10 acts of desperation. Sewer folk stealing bread not out of malice but of hunger, smuggling medicine to the sick, breaking laws to survive. The cartel had created chaos, but the system had created poverty. In response, Bingus proposed a controversial solution: the Sewer Authorisation Act. This law would give mayors the power to seal off or restrict sewer access in their towns. It framed the sewers as a danger, a base of operations for criminals, a source of pollution, and an architectural hazard. But the act went further. It gave local governments power to deploy the Kadus Guard to enforce it. The Provincial Council voted 5 in favour, Provincial Governor Bingus Aether of Kadus, Grand Water Mage Krill Snapper of Sparkstone Mages Academy, General Lugs of the Kadus Guards, Mayor Gluteon Munch II of Athlon, and Mayor Frederick Valentine of Sparkstone. Two opposed, Mayor Scott the Jort of Waden and Purpurator, the sewer folks only represent. The result was swift and catastrophic. Mayor Frederick, a staunch supporter of the act, moved immediately to seal the sewer entrances in Sparkstone. To the people below, this wasn't safety, it was exile. The surface had declared war on the sewers, not with an army, but with concrete and steel. Outrage swept through the lower tunnels. Sewer folk gathered in masses, furious, abandoned, and starving. To them, this was no longer about religion or crime or politics. This was about survival. The sealing of the sewers was the spark that lit the fuse. The sewer war had begun. Despite growing unrest, Bingus Aether's achievements had not gone unnoticed. Under his leadership, Sparkstone had transformed from a modest port into a provincial capital of power and influence. And in 82 Voyager's era, Bingus received his greatest honour yet. He was elected Chancellor of the State of Zamotz. For the surface dwellers and political elite, this was seen as a triumph, a rightful reward for a man who brought prosperity to the coast. But to the people below, it was something else entirely. It was confirmation that the state of Zamotz stood with Bingus and not with them. That the governor who once walked amongst the sewer folk now stood above them, cloaked in power, protected by title, and backed by a nation that had long ignored their cries. Tensions rose to a fever pitch. The streets were quiet, but only because everyone was watching, waiting for what came next. What began as a protest became the first true battle of the sewer war. As the Kadus Guard moved to enforce the newly passed Sewer Authorisation Act, they targeted the primary entrance to the underground, a sewer gate by the Sparkstone docks. But they weren't alone. Gathered outside was a crowd of many. Sewer folk, nationalists, true followers, mended dissenters, and displaced citizens, all standing in defiance. Makeshift barriers, food tents, protest signs, and angry chants filled the air. This was no longer a mere demonstration, it was a resistance. Despite rising tensions, the Kadus Guard held resistant. For days they stood by, trying to de-escalate, but the camp only grew stronger. And then everything changed. From high above, a single act would ignite the battle. Lugs, commander of the Kadus Guard, slipped into the higher levels of the city. A quiet catwalk that overlooked the protest encampment below. Without warning, he unleashed a stream of lava down onto the encampment. What was meant to scatter the protesters only set them ablaze, literally and politically. Cries of terror turned to screams of rage, tents burned, guards were pulled into the crowd, the blockade exploded into chaos. The protesters retaliated immediately, makeshift weapons, stolen potions, flaming debris hurled into the guards' formations. The Kadus Guard, caught off guard by the scale of the uprising, scrambled to regain control. Frederick Valentine, the mayor of Sparkstone, attempted to issue an emergency withdrawal. But by then, well, it was too late. The battle had begun. Fighting spilled into the nearby warehouses and alleyways. Smoke choked the harbour. For hours the city trembled as citizen clashed with citizen. When the sun finally set, Sparkstone was a battlefield, and neither side had any intention of backing down. With the Battle of the Docks raging across Sparkstone, the Kadus Guard found themselves overwhelmed. The surface was no longer safe. Armed sewer folk had stormed the streets, set fire to buildings, and taken over outposts. The city was bleeding. The Guard, despite their training, were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. But after a long and brutal fight, the tide turned. By nightfall, the Kadus Guard had forced the rebels back, by pushing them down into the depths from which they came, into the sewers. The sewers, however, were no easy battleground. The narrow tunnels and maze-like corridors were heavily fortified. Guard entry was bottlenecked, and every step forward was met with ambushes, traps, and arrow fire from unseen rebels. The Kadus Guard had expected disorganized rioters. What they found was a well-trained militia. Using guerrilla warfare, the rebels fought back with deadly precision. Each ambush was a statement. They weren't citizens anymore, they were soldiers. And their weapons, armor and potions revealed something even more chilling. A heavy backing from Ashran's cartel. Sparkstone's criminal underworld had become the rebel war machine. After hours of savage combat, with both sides bloodied and broken, the rebels did something unexpected. They didn't surrender. They vanished. Using the vast, hidden network of tunnels, the sewer folk fled north, escaping under the very feet of the Guard. Their destination, the town of Pinehey. Meanwhile, the Kadus Guard, disoriented and lost in the labyrinth of stone and water, were ordered to fall back to Sparkstone and regroup. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. The rebels didn't stop at retreat, they advanced. Emerging from the tunnels beneath Pinehey, the rebel militia swiftly seized control of the town. Caught completely off guard, the Kadus Guard patrols stationed in Pinehey were overrun. Some fought, most fled. Those who survived retreated back to Sparkstone, leaving the northern town in rebel hands. Now holding strategic ground, the rebels did not scatter or loot, they dug in. They occupied a large manor on the edge of town, a structure that overlooked the surrounding region. Reinforced and rearmed, they turned it into a makeshift fortress. Trenches were dug, watchtowers raised, and from within the stone walls of the manor they waited. This time, they wouldn't be the ones running. News of the occupation quickly reached Bingus Aether. Just as swiftly, his answer came. A full regiment of the Kadus Guard was mobilised. Under his direct command, they marched north from Sparkstone to retake Pinehey. This was no longer a matter of policing unrest. This was war, and both sides knew it. The Kadus Guard arrived in Pinehey under the cover of nightfall, advancing from the western hills, their banners fluttering in the wind. Scouts and sentries were deployed, archers climbed rooftops. From above, they could see it clearly. The manor was fortified, the rebels entrenched beyond thick stone and reinforced barricades. A tense standoff held the town in silence, and then the siege began. Every attempt to breach the manor met merciless resistance. Rebel archers rained down arrows in the balconies, hidden traps and lava dumps burned entire squads alive. The Kadus Guard could barely approach without suffering heavy casualties. For hours and hours they tried, and for hours and hours they failed. But in the chaos of the siege came a breakthrough. A small detachment of elite Kadus Guard troops scaled the walls of the neighbouring buildings. They leapt across rooftops, dodging patrols and slipping past spotters. And then, with a crash of glass and a burst of flame, they breached the roof of the manor. Caught off guard, the rebels were flushed out into the streets. The battle changed instantly. No longer protected by stone and lava, the rebels now fought in the narrow alleys and town squares of Pinehey, where the Kadus Guard had the advantage in numbers, training and tactics. What followed was a brutal street-by-street fight where friend and foe clashed in the shadow of burning rooftops. By noon, the manor was lost. The rebels had been routed, but the victory was short-lived. As the Kadus Guard secured the town, a new wave of fighters arrived. Not rebels, but cartel militia, armed, trained, and merciless. They swept through the town, catching the guard off guard, reinvigorating the rebel lines. Outnumbered and exhausted, the Kadus Guard was pushed back. Battered and beaten, the surviving Kadus troops retreated north to Induzia, a quiet town nestled in the hills. There, stationed forces loyal to Kadus provided a chance to regroup, resupply, and strike back. The plan was to return to Pinehey, this time stronger. But as the guard licked their wounds, a shadow loomed over Induzia. A messenger arrived, breathless, Bloodied, Lugs received the news with a grim silence. The rebels were not waiting. They were coming, and their next target was Indusia itself. The hunters had become the hunted. Kadus faced its most precarious moment yet. Indusia stood between the rebels and full control of northern Zamotz. If it fell, Kadus would be split in two, and the war could be lost. Lugs had little time, few troops, and a settlement barely fortified. But retreat was not an option. They would stand and fight. Lugs and the Kadus Guard knew the rebels were coming. They only had days, maybe hours, to prepare. The town of Indusia was fortified, barricades raised. The narrow stone bridge at the town's entrance became the final line of defense. Archers lined the rooftops, watchmen scanned the horizon, and then the enemy came. First came the rebel vanguard, emerging from the woods like shadows. Then behind them the true might, Ashran's cartel militia, armoured and armed with weapons smuggled in from black markets across Abexis. Their charge shook the ground. A storm of arrows lit the skies. The Kadus Guard held fast. Steel clashed on stone, flaming arrows struck rooftops, smoke and screams filled the air. For a moment it seemed the guard could hold, but the cartel had brought more than swords. They brought explosives. The guard's line was breached. Rebels flooded into the streets, overwhelming the defenders in a tide of violence. House by house the guard was pushed back. Lugs himself was wounded trying to rally a defence at the town hall. By nightfall, Indusia was lost. Rebel flags flew over the rooftops. Cartel graffiti was sprayed across government walls. The north of Kadus had fallen. This was a full-scale insurgency. The government of Kadus was under siege. With his authority broken and his life in danger, Bingus fled north to the capital of Adramis, Velarum. There, in the marble halls of the nation's heart, Bingus was granted political asylum. He was sheltered by his allies, but haunted by the province he'd left behind. The war for Kadus had reached a boiling point. Rebels held Piney and Indusia. Cartel influence ran unchecked, and the people were divided, broken. The rebels knew one truth. They could not hold Kadus forever. If the full weight of the Adramis military came down upon them, it would be a swift and merciless end. And so, negotiations began. The rebel leadership, backed by the cartel's influence and loyalty of the Sewerfolk, came to the table with three demands. First, increased representation of Sewerfolk in Zermatt's government. Second, abolishment of all existing laws that sought to alienate or disadvantage the Sewerfolk. And third, a new decree. No future law could be passed that failed to treat the Sewerfolk as protected and equal citizens of Kadus. To many, it sounded like progress. To others, it sounded like appeasement. Chancellor Bingus Aether listened quietly. He had spent years building Kadus. He had watched it burn from the inside. He knew the truth behind the rebels, that even now, Ashran's cartel operated freely within the sewers, and nothing in these peace terms would stop them. But he also knew something darker. Civil wars do not end clean. They do not end with victory, only with loss. They tear families apart, they turn neighbours into enemies, and even when the fighting stops, the wounds don't heal easily. This wasn't just a conflict over law or land, it was a war over identity. Who Kadus belonged to, and who had the right to shape his future. Bingus, weary and wounded, and desperate for peace, agreed to the terms. The war was over. The rebels withdrew from Piney, Indusia, and Sparkstone. The Kadus Guard re-entered the towns, rebuilding broken infrastructure and restoring order. The sewer entrances remained open, but now under regulation, with new representatives from below granted seats in the Zamotz Congress. The streets fell quiet. The province began to heal. Kadus remembers the lava falling from the sky. It remembers the clash of blades in the sewer tunnels. It remembers the banners of rebellion flying over the rooftops of Piney. Peace had returned, but the scars remained. Everything you've just watched, the battles, the betrayals, the protests, the politics, it all actually happened. Not in a modded or scripted server, but on a live Minecraft server with real players, real towns, and real history. This was the Sewer War of Kadus, a civil war fought not with commands or creative mode, but with strategy, speeches, and sword fights. All of it natural unfolding on the world of Stoneworks. Want to be a part of it? Join Stoneworks and write your own chapter of Minecraft history. It is open to everyone, whether you want to be a king, a rebel, a builder, or a bard, the next great story could be yours. If you liked this video, I have playlists on my channel filled with other intense conflicts, deep lore, unforgettable moments across many games. So go check them out. you'll find plenty more where this came from. Huge shout out to the channel members, you're the reason I can keep telling these stories. Thank you very much for watching. This was Kadus. This was the Sewer War. And the world will remember. Until next time, stay sharp and keep building history.